Disclosure: I was invited by the Panzermuseum and the Tank Museum at Bovington. This video contains product placement. In this video we look at the Soviet Tankers Manual from 1944 that covers single tanks, tank platoons and tank companies. We look at the various instructions and statements and also compare them with German instructions. The manual describes a tank and how it is to be employed. Tank is a powerful weapon system, capable of destroying lone tanks, emplacements and enemy personnel. A tank always acts as a part of a tank platoon. It must maintain its position in battle formation and move using the terrain in a pointed direction in accordance with the task, commands and signals from the platoon commander. This is similar to German regulations. There it is also noted that the tank performs its combat missions in a platoon. One major difference between the Soviet manual and the tank company German manual is that this Soviet manual defines the size of a tank platoon and tank company rather late in comparison to the German manual, and in a far more general fashion. Platoons of heavy and medium tanks consist of 2 or 3 tanks, platoons of armored vehicles, armored personnel carriers, from 3 to 5 vehicles. This is in contrast to the German manual of the medium tank company from 1941 that notes already in the third point the composition of the company. The company is composed of, first, the combat element with a company headquarters section of 2 Panzer IV, 1 light tank platoon of 5 Panzer II, and the first to third platoons of 4 Panzer IV each. This is of course due to the scope of the Soviet manual that covers the single tank, platoon and company, whereas the German manual is strictly for the company with a specific tank type, the Panzer IV. Additionally, the Soviet manual covers armored vehicles in general, so armored cars and personnel carriers, medium and heavy tanks. Now it is important to note that generally the Germans had 5 tanks per platoon and 4 tanks per heavy platoon. The described medium company was the foundation for the heavy companies, whereas the former light companies became medium companies. In contrast, for the Soviets, a medium tank platoon usually had 3 tanks and 2 tanks for the heavy platoon, from 1942-43 onwards. If you're interested in tank warfare, be sure to check out our new limited edition publication Tank Assault and enjoy our 15% discount launch sale on all our books. Tank Assault is a faithful translation of the Soviet 1944 Combat Manual for Armored and Mechanized Troops and includes the tactics and formations of tanks in the Red Army, information on tank combat and the original visualizations. The book comes with a foreword by the prolific World War II tank expert Steven Zaloga. The limited bilingual edition is available until March 2024. To celebrate the launch, we have 15% discount sale on all our books, including the one on the German tank companies, assault platoons, the Stuka dive bomber and more. Check it out in the description below. If you order during the launch window, these books will arrive before Christmas and thus the perfect way to treat yourself or a fellow history buff. The next points are about leaving or not leaving the tank and what to do if a tanker was wounded. The Soviet manual notes: a tank crew under any circumstances must complete their combat mission, act boldly, decisively and daringly, selflessly fight in the most difficult situations, relentlessly push forward and always help a fellow comrade. If the tank is hit or breaks down, the crew must protect it as long as possible. Each soldier from the crew who was wounded must gather all his strength and continue the battle. This is similar to German instructions for the crew of a Panzer I, where it is noted that if the tank commander, who was also the gunner, should be incapacitated, that the driver would take over and fire the machine guns as long as possible. When it comes to continuing the fight under various circumstances, the Soviet instructions are quite extensive. Without an order from the platoon commander, the tank crew under no circumstances leaves their position in the battle formation. In case when all other tanks of the platoon are taken out of action, the tank continues the battle, joining another platoon of the company. If the tank is out of ammunition or its armament is disabled, the tank, with permission of the platoon commander, retreats behind cover, replenishes ammunition or repairs his armament. If the tank has used up all its fuel, it continues the battle firing from the stationary position. This is in contrast to German instructions that particularly note that the tank should never be allowed to fall into enemy hands, yet when it came to abandoning the tank, they had more leeway according to the regulations from 1939. The crew may abandon an immobilized tank only when it has used up all the ammo or unable to fire, and when recovery by other vehicles is not expected. The Soviet manual does not explicitly note in this section that it is forbidden to leave the tank, but for me it seems to be implied due to stating it must protect the tank as long as possible, and particularly this sentence seems odd. If the visual contact with the target is lost, it is allowed, taking precautions, to inspect the area through an open hatch. Meanwhile, the German manual specifically notes that it can be tactically sound to defend an immobilized tank dismounted from nearby. The next part is about the tank in the offensive. It contains general points about the tank commander giving a mission to his crew based on the platoon's objective, as well as studying the enemy gun positions, the terrain, and similar important battle preparations. The instructions to reach full combat readiness are as follows. The time remaining before reaching the line of departure position must be used to bring the tank into full combat readiness. Eliminate detected malfunctions. Refuel with fuel and lubricants regardless of the expenditure. Inspect the running gear of the tank. Inspect the side tank's armament, replenish and prepare ammunition. Check the readiness of the radio station and intercom devices. Study the communication scheme and radio data. Check and bring to alert the means of chemical protection. Check the fitting of closed hatches and eliminate the gaps in order to prevent the flow of incendiary mixtures into the tank. This is rather interesting since I can't remember encountering such detailed instruction in the German manual, something I will cover at the end of the video in more detail. Also, the incendiary mixtures refer to what we generally call Molotov cocktails. If you want to know if those still work against modern tanks, check out this video from my main channel. One aspect covers camouflage during the preparation for the attack. This is particularly interesting because here the German manual is more detailed. The Soviet manual notes, having arrived at the line of departure position, the crew must establish observation in the sector indicated by the platoon commander, camouflage the tank, ensure its unobstructed departure for the attack, and assume combat readiness number 1, maintaining continuous communication with the platoon commander. For the line of departure, the tank goes into attack at the signal of the platoon commander. Meanwhile, the German manual for the tank company for 1941 gives the specific instruction. The entry into the assembly area must be done silently, low engine speed. Camouflage against ground and air observation is particularly important. Track marks and skids caused by steering movement must be removed in order to conceal the presence of tanks from enemy aerial reconnaissance. Of course, this could be due to the fact that tanks in 1941 were still rather new, whereas in 1944 such information was already common knowledge. But considering how detailed the Soviet manual is in other aspects, I find this very interesting. Another major difference, particularly for combat, that I found was the aspect about firing during movement. Whereas the Soviet manual specifically mentions firing on the move, the tank attacks with maximum speed, suppresses the enemy's guns, mortars, machine gun crews, and infantry with intense fire on the move, and skillfully maneuvering, uses the terrain to reach the flank or reach the enemy's weapon emplacements, avoiding a frontal attack. The German manual specifically notes that it should be the exception. Firing the 7.5 cm tank cannon usually occurs while stationary. Firing while driving reduces accuracy and results in high ammunition consumption. It is therefore rarely justified. Now, the Soviet manual previously made a clear distinction on what types of fire are used against what targets. When firing from a tank, the following methods of firing are used. Fire on the move, used for suppressing the personnel and gun emplacements. Fire from short halts, used against all targets. Stops are made with a duration of 4 to 8 seconds to fire one shot from a cannon or several bursts from a machine gun. Places for short halts are chosen behind cover or a mask. Note that masks are engineering structures or local objects used to hide troops and vehicles from enemy reconnaissance or to change their appearance. Natural masks are forests, terrain irregularities, structures, and artificial masks are basically engineering structures. Fire from stops, used to fire from behind cover or a mask, a tank moving at combat speed approaching a cover or a defilade. Stops for 30 to 45 seconds to hit the target with 3 or 4 cannon shots. Stationary fire, the most effective type of tank fire, used mainly in defense and from ambushes. If you liked the information and want more, be sure to take the opportunity to benefit from our 15% launch sale on all books. This is the perfect time to pick up the limited bilingual edition of Tank Assault and a host of other great World War II literature that is based on German or Soviet primary sources, like manuals and regulations. A final note on German versus Soviet differences. First off, this is the only extensive Soviet manual from the Second World War about tank combat that I read. In contrast, for the Germans I read several. Second, general German manuals for the company level and below were with a few exceptions all from before the war or up until 1941. Additionally, these were far less extensive than this Soviet manual, which brings me to the next point. German World War II manuals were often rather short, at least from what I've seen from US and Soviet manuals so far. At the same time, they often copy-pasted information. For instance, the manual for the Panzer I, Panzer III and Panzer IV all have a chapter on chemical warfare defense that is 2 pages long. Not really that consistent. The Panzer I manual from 1939 has a section on combat. The Panzer III and IV from 1940 don't have a section on combat at all. Meanwhile, the Soviet manual seems to be very consistent and extensive when it comes to the individual instructions, although sometimes there's a certain lack of information, something I will discuss in the next video on my main channel. Thank you to the Panzermuseum Munster and the Tank Museum at Bovington for inviting me in the previous videos. Thank you for watching and see you next time.